Hi, today I'm going to show you my scratch-built Japanese Type 97 Chi-Ha tanks. I built them for bolt action, as you may already have figured out, and I'm just going to show you around them and show you what I did. This is the Type 97. It's the standard medium tank of the Japanese army, although really its armour wasn't really that much better than a light tank, but I think we'll more or less class it as a medium tank. It was designed to replace the Type 89 because Type 98 IGO, sorry, because the Type 98 was, let's say, rather slow. They couldn't keep up with infantry, and so they came up with this design instead, which could keep up with infantry. It's fitted with a 57mm howitzer, exactly the same gun as is in the Type 98. It's a very handy gun for firing against masonry targets. That's for firing against bunkers, buildings, infantry in the open. It fires high explosive and armour piercing, although the armour piercing isn't designed to take on tanks, it's designed to take on concrete bunkers and things like that.
Well, it's not armour though, that's concrete.
Yeah, but it was technically an armour piercing round designed to penetrate bunker armour.
I would call it
the Type 97 was a heavy, medium infantry support tank. That's what it was designed to do. A problem that the Japanese had with the Type 95, which is the tiny little light tank, it didn't have a howitzer mounted on it, and the Japanese needed some sort of mobile howitzer to support infantry, and so they fitted it to this tank. As the war progressed, the need for a tank with a howitzer mounted on it became less and less, and so as they began to encounter enemy tanks, they decided to try and upgun this tank by giving it a much more powerful cannon, a 47mm gun. This particular version is the early version. It's the one with the 57mm howitzer. They came in to service just before the battles of Khatli Gol, when the Japanese and Russians began fighting each other. But I believe only 4 of these actually saw service against the Russians. The Type 97 was the main tank to fight against the Russians. These guys are, as I said, infantry support tanks, and they didn't do all that well. One of them got tangled up in barbed wire and used as target practice by the Russians, and most of the others didn't fare any better either, because they're fitted with a howitzer, not a tank killing gun. So really most of the fighting will come down to your light tanks armed with a 37mm if you're doing early battles. Likewise in China, they mainly use the 57mm gun rather than the 47mm anti-tank gun. As time went on and the Chinese started to get better equipment and the Americans started to turn up with vehicles like Shermans, it became necessary to, as I say, upgrade the tank, and it had a much bigger turret put on the top and a better gun put in it. But that isn't that version, this is the early version, because I'm mainly playing the earlier part of the war, and so there's no point designing a tank that came around at the end of 1942 if I'm only going to be playing the early battles. And I can always upgrade them later on. Overall armament, it has a machine gun at the front in the hull. It has a machine gun mounted on the roof for anti-aircraft. In fact, it was the first Japanese tank to be deliberately fitted with an anti-aircraft machine gun. And at the rear of the turret, it had a machine gun as well. The Japanese didn't use the machine gun firing backwards, they used to actually turn the turret all the way around and use the machine gun firing forward. Although, being a howitzer mounted tank, there wasn't really much need to have an anti-infantry machine gun, because they tended to be a lot further back and not right up in front of the infantry. all the same, it gives it a lot of firepower. So you can get yourself 3 machine guns all blasting away at the same time on one tank. That's a lot of firepower for bolt action. So you've got, what, 12 dice to fire against the enemy? That's pretty good going.
I see a lot of 6s in my life.
Yeah, so that's 12 dice to fire against your enemy, or you can use its 57mm howitzer, which does D6 HE damage and 2D pin. So it's a pretty good gun. It's not a bad tank to have. The Russians at the time had no real similarly armed tank. The Russians at the time had more or less upgunned all their tanks to being fitted with a tank gun. 45mm tank gun was their standard tank gun. So as the war went on, obviously it became obvious that the Japanese really needed to fit a better gun, and unfortunately this particular tank wasn't really the right weight or size to be able to field something much bigger than it already had. Other than the new turret, there wasn't really much else they could do with it. However, this version of tank did actually carry on in combat for quite a time, and the tanks that got the new turret, the old turrets, that's these turrets you can see here, were generally taken off and stuck on a light tank. So the Japanese carried on using things that work again and again. So there are my tanks. I'll just show you around them properly. You can see the wheels on the side. That's the rear of the tank, and of course the turret, which is the important bit. And it is a nice little model. It was slightly easier to do than the light tanks that I did earlier. We're playing with the camera. The light tanks that I did earlier were slightly more complicated with their whole design. This one was actually much easier to make. And now I've had a nice look around it. The actual hull was made out of card, and then I put modelling clay over it to give it some detail, press detail into it, which is how I generally make things like that. And it was a nice little project to do, and I think I may at one point, if we decide to do later battles, upgun the tank to have the new turret. I haven't got around to that yet. Right now I'm concentrating on collecting early war stuff for the early war battles, and my next project will be Malaya and the Dutch East Indies, where these tanks certainly saw a lot of combat. Although again, I should mention that the primary tank of the Japanese army of this period was not this tank, it was the Type 95. This would become the main battle tank of the Japanese army, but not at this point. Anyway, that's the end of the video. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you like the video. I hope you like my tanks. It took quite a while to put them together. And I hope you leave any comments you like in the comment bar, and click like if you enjoyed it, and subscribe if you want to see more. I will have lots more stuff like this going on in future, and if you check out my battle reports you will get to see all my tanks in action, which should be quite fun. So this has been Vespasian, thank you.
Goodbye.